Good evening, everybody. Thanks all for coming. Thanks for braving the cold. Thanks for everybody on Zoom who's attending. Before we get started, I'd just like to offer this board's condolences. We lost a member of the select board. So I'd like to offer our condolences to the family of James Sullivan. As many of you know, Jim Sullivan passed away on December 31st. Jim served the town in many roles over several years, and his dedication and service to this town is going to be missed. So again, just condolences to his family. Okay, it is 6:31 on January 11th, 2022. This is a meeting of the Hinsdale Zoning Board of Appeals. This meeting is to act on an application received by Northgate Ventures LLC to expand the use of the Camp Emerson campground. This meeting was originally opened on November 30th. On that meeting, we heard Northgate's proposal and then public comment. That meeting was suspended to December 14th, 2021. At that meeting, we continued public comment and board members asked various questions. New material had been recently submitted and was received and needed to be reviewed by the board as well as Brent White and all parties involved, really. Therefore, the meeting was again suspended and continued until tonight. Present at tonight's meeting is Bruce Alexander, Dion Douglas, Dan Thorin, and myself, Jeff Viner. When we left off, there were a couple open issues. I believe it was Bruce, but a board member requested the demographics of the park users. We did receive that. Bruce, you did see that, right? I'm not sure if it was exactly what you were looking for. It was more of the ages of kids. I didn't know if, does that satisfy what you were looking for?
Yeah, generally.
Okay. Northgate was concerned with the connection fee and what the plan was going to be for that connection fee. I do know that hasn't quite been resolved, but Brent White is going to present something in a minute that I believe will address that and allow us to move forward without that information. The board requested a demolition plan and the scope to the amount of clearing to be done. That is just been provided to us. It was emailed out earlier today, but most board members, I'm sure, just are seeing it for the first time. We'll probably have Brent explain that. If a board member feels like they need more time to review it, we'll have to take more time to review it because obviously we just got it. But let's see where the meeting goes and how it heads and if it becomes pertinent information at that time. Let's see what else. Also, I had requested data about the occupancy percentages, such as what percentage of the park is full in May and in June, just to get a better idea of the numbers. If you're talking 3.86 people per campsite, how often is and how many people are there. I've not received anything on that. And maybe we'll get to Chelsea. Maybe she does have some information on that. And again, if we don't have it, we're going to move forward and see if it becomes something that the board wishes to request more time to get. So really now, Brent, you submitted something as well today, and I'd just like you to read that into record because I think it sets a clearer path for us to move forward.
Thank you and good evening, board members, those present and those joining us via Zoom this evening. Before I begin my presentation, I too would like to just echo our condolences to the Sullivan family. I had the personal pleasure of working with Mr. Sullivan in his personal capacity of his business, and always found him to be a gentleman and a pleasure to work with over the last 6 months in his role on the select board and the planning board. So please accept that on our behalf as well.
Thank you.
So after the last meeting here, the applicant who is also joining us via Zoom this evening, I believe Chelsea Rotzenbrook, as well as attorney Jeffrey Scrimo and Dan Dumais from MDM Transportation Consultants. With the holidays, we did have a chance to take a step back and think greater. Actually, Mr. Chairman, it was a comment that you had made with respect to procedure in terms of The special permit process is the special permit process. The connection fee is the connection fee that would be paid and determined at a later date. And the more that we thought about the review comments that we had received from DPC engineering, the discussions that we've had separate from the last public hearing, we feel, first off, we feel comfortable with the work that we've had with DPC, that the comments that they raised in both of their reviews that they provided, both with respect to water, wastewater, and drainage back in November, as well as their recommendations on pedestrian safety here, we felt that those were reasonable conditions and things that we felt we could work upon the receipt of a special permit, work with them to better refine what those details would be, and that incorporating that feedback, the opportunity to work more closely with DPC to address those comments, as well as a future DPW superintendent to incorporate that little feedback into construction documents before we would certainly receive permission to connect to the water or sewer utility. So I think the discussion of the connection fee itself, from my discussions, we have faith in the process here that a reasonable fee will be charged to accommodate for the additional use of the water and wastewater system coming from this expansion here. It's never been our intention to suggest that there would not be an increase in use and capacity here. And we just realized that it's not fair to anybody to slow down the process based on that one question.
Okay.
Really and thinking of that, it seems that has been, aside from the plans that we've submitted that were requested here, our intention was if any additional information had been provided, that we would just provide all the information at once to the board. So certainly nothing to hide. The limits of clearing are the same that have been on the plans since October. It was just the appearance of seeing that on the aerial photo itself. Just over 20 acres of forested or semi-forested area would be cleared as a part of the development. I think that's something you would ask us to quantify. And finally, the limits of our improvements from the very end of our expansion furthest into the property is actually closer to 1,700 feet to Belmont Reservoir. So more distance than I had suggested at the last meeting, to have the opportunity to go back and look at that more closely.
Okay.
And really, as kind of a conclusion to that point here, thinking about the connection fees, we feel as the applicant, and what gives the town, frankly, the most protection would be to, if the board were willing to consider closing the hearing this evening and grant the special permit, that as a part of the deliberation that you might have would be to incorporate essentially the recommendations from DPC, and that prior to any actual connection that would be approved by the selectmen as their role as the water sewer commissioners, that our construction documents would reflect the questions or concerns that they've had. I know it's a process that would take some time, but I have faith that we'd be able to work with DPC and the town will be protected going forward.
Okay.
Our team is here via Zoom as well as I to answer any last questions that you might have. I think to a certain degree, I think we've told you everything we can about this here, other than any last questions that you might have. And we just really wanted to also take this opportunity to thank the board, Mr. Graves, as well as all the town officials who have worked with us really over the last year. We know a great deal of time and attention has gone into that, and we're very appreciative of that. So thank you.
Thank you. I do have a question for you while you're right there. So just to be, clear, I read this, quickly as, as when you sent it out. You are basically saying that to speed up the process, we can count on you working with DPC and fulfilling the recommendations that they have provided in both of their past studies.
That is correct. And
to agreeable.
Correct.
And with DPC.
That is correct. And we believe that by virtue of the fact that we would still need a permit to connect to the water system, a permit to connect to the sewer system, as well as an order of conditions from the Conservation Commission here, that really through those processes, we're not going to break ground until those questions are addressed to their satisfaction.
Okay. And so in my opinion, this lets us move forward based on now we don't have to be so concerned on how it's built. And we can now focus on whether it should in fact be built according to.
That's our intention. That's our request.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Speaking of the mic, please, I was thinking mask up.
Yeah, he's just asking you to speak more into the mic or didn't take your mask off.
I'll take my mask off now. If more people are going to come up and speak, I might prefer to keep it on if you don't mind.
Yep, of course.
Great.
Let's see. So at this point, do you have anything else that you want to submit into the evidentiary portion of this hearing? Do you have any other comments that Attorney Scrimo or Chelsea wants to?
I'll certainly turn over the floor to them before we conclude our remarks. The only thing I would remind the board is through the original application process, we've now received peer review on every element as it relates to a public utility, as relates to the findings that this board would need to make as it relates to the ability to not overload a municipal utility. We've made every commitment that we can to address the technical concerns that are not shown on the plans as of today. We feel that condition would allow the board to approve the project moving forward more comfortably. The board has received the traffic study that included traffic data, not only from the spring of 2022, but as well as back in June. They did some supplemental counts. So I believe there's been some concern that the study was purely based on numbers that were done in an off-peak time. I just wanted to remind the board that the final study that was submitted back in October did indeed have traffic count data that was taken in the summertime, as well as accounted for projections as it related to the COVID-19 pandemic. We feel based on the findings that we've had, as well as incorporating the feedback from DPC as it relates to improvements within the right-of-way of Michaels Road and Longview Avenue here, that would allow us to allow the board to make a finding that it will not cause undue traffic congestion or impair pedestrian safety.
Good, thank you.
Thank you.
I still have some questions that I'd like answered, but I didn't know if you want to defer to Chelsea or if she has anything first, or do you want me to? I'll ask some questions first. And I don't know if any of the board members have any additional questions, but so now that we can, not worry about, what's your diameter of the sewer pipe and this and that, it is comforting to know now we can focus on more of the zoning aspects of it. The reason why we, kind of got the extra studies in this, just to, give the town some protection, provided this was going to go forward. I mean, I would also suggest the town has to hire, a project manager to benefit their, side on this, going forward, just because it's such a huge development. But, and that's if the project was to go forward. Let's talk a little bit about water usage. There's a lot, concern about, water. Water is a very limited resource. Obviously, you've had studies done. There's a lot, and I know we've talked about this before, but I'm concerned with the numbers, and I just want you to talk a little bit about the numbers and how you're coming up with about 13 gallons a day per person. The reason I'm questioning it doesn't seem to be accurate with the surrounding camp. It doesn't seem to be accurate with national data. And honestly, I got my sewer and water bill the other day, and my household, which is only 2 people, uses 140 gallons a day. So, I mean, we're up to 70, and, other people in town are like 80. And, so it seems like a very low number. And if you put the high number on it, you could still be within an acceptable range, but it's dramatically different to me than a 13 gallon per day number. Can you explain that? Is that just a missed data, or just that was by that number, and that's what you feel is your number? Our opinion, and I believe I stated at this last meeting, but I'd like to reiterate what our position on this is with respect to the review of. You have to talk into, sorry. Is that better? Yes, good. It's noticeably different. Okay, thank you. Our position is we researched and found data that was provided by the U.S. Forest Service. We understand, I reviewed the data that was submitted by members of the public that's available online. I've had a chance to discuss this with Mr. Prickett. And we would certainly agree that there are opportunities that this type of use would see less domestic water use than a single family home would, as it relates to just the nature of camping as compared to your year-round occupation of the home. And in considering what the connection fees would be, as well as in asking this board to make a judgment on the overall impacts to the water system itself,
we feel that if you were to base the consumptive use based upon the Title V capacity, that gives everybody a common point to agree on what that water usage would be. Part of what will be factored in later on will be further discussion with that as it relates to what our connection fee will be based on our one-time impact to connecting to the system. And the November memorandum that DPC had provided had summarized, and we agreed that the approved yield from the Belmont is 200,000 gallons per day. And even if you were to factor in the full Title V flow from this facility, which would be approximately 28,000 gallons per day, along with the existing use that's been already demonstrated by the town, the average use, we're still approximately 35 to 40% below what the DEP approved safe withdrawal from the reservoir is. So from our perspective here, rather than going back and forth, I wish I had more just solid data for an exact use. I don't have that. We looked at other information. I can agree. I can review other data. And again, as Mr. Perkin and I have discussed here, is it possible that it's more than 13 gallons per day per person? It certainly is. And we feel the fact that the connection fee will be guided by the guidance from DPC to protect the town's interests, and the fact that we will pay for all the water that we use. This hearing or this special permit approval process is not going to be the end determinant of what our fees will be for water use going forward. We will have to pay for everything that we use. We have every incentive to, certainly with the new water line construction throughout the property, it's essentially going to be a brand new water system. So in terms of leaks and I know that's an issue that's occurred on this property, as well as throughout the water system in town, we feel that's actually going to be an improvement, knowing that for such a potentially large customer, there's going to be less of a risk of a water leak coming forward, but when this project is built out as compared to what might be there today.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Dan, do you have any questions?
Staying with the water, on the water issue, just educate me a little bit. Bigger picture. I worry that this will put an undue strain on the overall water supply of the town going down the road. Is it a year from now? Is it 2 years from now? I don't know. What do you suggest on that?
I would suggest
bigger picture.
Sure, bigger picture. I would say based on the information I just cited with respect to the 200,000 gallons per day as the approved safe yield, and with the proposal, you would essentially have 2 or 3 more Northgates that would, based on our 317 sites that would need to come into town before you are even getting to your safe yield. The other thing I would note too, that as a customer of the system, if we do have an experience closer to 2020, where we did have a relatively dry summer, and any water restrictions that any customer of the Hinsdale water system we would be subject to that as well. So in terms of irrigating fields or anything that would be restricted by the town of Hinsdale, we would be subject to those same restrictions as well. Mm-hmm. Whether that's our pool, our splash pad, anything that based on whatever order is issued, we would have to comply with that and subject to fine if we were not to comply.
Right, you've made that point, yeah.
Right.
Thank you.
Now, would you also be willing, if we did get into a water issue, would you cut back on the number of RV sites that you would use?
I would defer to Ms. Bossenbrook on that question.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that. What was the question? Will we cut back on the number of RV sites if what?
That you would utilize if we did run into a major water problem, a big drought?
Yeah, and we have experience complying with drought compliance orders too. We have a campground in the Central Valley in California, and we have a compliance order that we work with we've worked with it for years. So we cut back on, any unneeded watering of landscaping. Yes, we advise our guests to cut back on their water usage. We're pretty familiar with operating in a drought.
She's not answering your question.
But would you cut back on, would you still utilize 317 RV sites? Or would you scale it back to say there's only 250 available right now because there's a drought?
I think it would depend on the actual water usage and what was required. So if we would need to cut back, yeah, I think that could be doable.
I might also suggest as it relates to ultimately we'll need to apply for a permit to connect to the water system. And I think that might be a more appropriate venue for those types of conditions where as a condition of our approval to connect to the water system, similar to the program that they have in California, we may be able to work with the Water and Sewer Commission to understand at what, based on existing circuit breakers or points where orders may be issued, we can figure out the details at that point without necessarily committing to a specific reduction in population today, whereas the Water and Sewer Commissioners would need to.
I just didn't know if you were open to something like that or not.
Yeah, I think the straight answer is yes, we're open to something like that, whether it's limiting the number of people, whether it's reducing the number of sites, whatever we would need to do to comply with the water conditions.
I would also note that the stormwater management system that we have designed could easily be incorporated where that water would be able to be utilized, stored water would be able to be utilized for irrigation and other purposes to reduce our demand on the domestic water system as a whole.
Go ahead.
Have you considered in terms of the sewage, a holding tank and pumping it as necessary? It seems like that it would eliminate so many problems. Grinders can be a problem, loading, so forth. Have you considered doing that as opposed to connecting to the sewage system?
No, admittedly, the municipal sewer is a great part of what makes this a viable project here, and we've designed the sewer, we've proposed the sewer connection. We've got an entire day's storage of sewage on our property to allow for a slower metering of our flow into the sewage system to not conflict with peak flow periods. So we've gone from what would be a traditional pump station that you might see being installed to a significantly larger system with multiple holding tanks to provide additional storage on site. Our disposal is still into the municipal sewer, but we've gone to great lengths to provide additional storage on the property to ensure that we don't overload the sewer system, especially at a time where the pump station further down Longview may actually be activated. Those are some of the details that we'd be working with Mr. Prickett as it relates to some of our control systems and how we tie in, but we've gone to great lengths to provide a much larger holding tank on the property to be able to account for those peak flows and not interfere with the existing system that is in place. The other recommendation that was made was for investigating the downstream sewage system to see for inflow and infiltration, whether it's through a smoke test or a camera investigation, by sealing up sewer manholes that allow surface runoff to get in. That takes away capacity from the sewage systems, and we've committed to working with DPC to understand downstream where that would be, ultimately giving the town system more capacity as a whole. And as part of our approval of this, we would be responsible for assisting with that.
So pumping a tank out, a holding tank, and taking it down to the Pittsfield wastewater treatment plant wouldn't be an option?
No, sir. And just so you're aware, under Title V of the state sanitary code, even if we had a septic system, Title V would say if a municipal sewer is available, you must connect. We would actually have to obtain a variance from the Board of Health to allow for a tight tank legally on the property. And I don't know that the Board of Health would legally be able to grant us that variance when a municipal sewer exists. So unfortunately, I don't think that's even a viable option that would comply with state regulations.
Seems like it would eliminate a lot of problems.
I would disagree. I don't know that having a sanitation pump truck multiple times a day driving up down Longview Avenue is an improvement to.
Would it be that often?
Yes, it would. I mean, those trucks only hold 3,000 gallons.
Yeah, right. That seems like one truck a day.
No, sir. It'd be multiple trucks per day.
Okay.
In the lower period.
All right.
What we haven't seen about the sewer is how does this added amount of sewer, obviously, talking more than one pump truck a day's worth, how does that affect our agreement with Dalton and Pittsfield?
I can't speak to your agreement with Dalton Pittsfield other than we would continue to be a rate paying customer based on the rate structure that is established by the Hinsdale Water and Sewer Commission.
Do we have Dave Prickett?
I believe he is on the Zoom.
Dave's on the line. Dave, could you respond to that question for us?
We do. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so a couple of things here. Dave Prickett with DPC Engineering. Thanks, Brent. Been trying to lay low in the weeds here and wait till I was called on. Relative to downstream capacity, the town has a finite amount of capacity with Dalton in terms of an intermunicipal agreement. So much like you're considering doing on the water side, you would be allocating a percentage of your remaining capacity to the proposed development on the wastewater side. So I believe that addresses that question. Go ahead.
Dave, for like, could they or would they charge us more because of all that we are using, the more amount that we're using and they're having to, could they adjust their rate because of this, of what we're currently paying?
I would defer to the intricacies of the IMA to Attorney Bard, but my gut feel is that the proposed development wouldn't change the nature by which you pay pro rata for treatment and disposal. You would just be paying a slightly higher percentage of the overall costs of Pittsfield and Dalton, but it's based on the additional users that you would be adding through the Northgate project. So I believe it would be on a unit basis about the same as you are now.
Okay, thank you. Dave, I have a couple other questions for you if you're okay with it.
Of course.
Namely, could you speak, obviously you guys did a traffic study and we've reviewed that traffic study, and the White Engineering and Northgate are willing to work with your traffic study. But could you just speak to, it seems like that traffic study just kind of examined their traffic study and their areas, which were the areas of Michael's Road, Longview, and it didn't really check like what happens if they went astray, like a GPS or signage they missed and they got sent over Plunkett Ave or over Bridge Street. And then also the other question is, could you just talk to, is it a valid concern that adding that many vehicles and that many road trips, no matter what the condition of the road, with no shoulders and no really place for pedestrians to walk, does that has to impact pedestrian safety in some aspect, I imagine? No, or are we wrong?
No, I think to your first question relative to what happens, we did a peer review of the traffic study that was done by the proponent. I thought it was a well-performed traffic study that addressed most of what gets addressed when a project like this is proposed. It's almost impossible to try to perceive the impacts of every wrong turn that would occur. Anecdotally, just as someone who has children, someone who enjoys walking, there's obviously going to be changes to the traffic flow as a result. These roads aren't becoming 50% wider as proposed. They've addressed some of the key intersections and what to do there. But, that's why we came back in December and had some preliminary discussions with Brent about trying to improve some of the pinch points where pedestrians may be. But the ZBA and the residents of Hinsdale just need to understand that, should this move forward, like everything in life, it's a bit of a compromise. You understand what the increases to traffic will be. You understand the pros and cons of that traffic and how it may impact vehicle and pedestrian safety and access. And those would be essentially conditions you'd live with. You can't change the overall nature of the road without reconstructing, a ton of roads in Hinsdale. That would be unrealistic. I think that kind of addresses, it's a bit of a qualitative feel, right? This kind of comes down to feel and opinion. From an engineering standpoint, I thought the traffic study, hit the mark relative to what they were showing, that it meets the standard of care for the roadways and the capacities of the roadways in this setting. If I could, Mr. Chairman, just go back in time for 5 minutes and just chime in on a possible condition you might consider relative to sewer connection charges. I didn't have a chance to respond to that.
Yes, please.
Okay, so again, and to Brent's point, without getting into the weeds, I would just suggest that the ZBA and the town consider I think we're probably pretty close on flows, or hopefully, but I would make sure that the language said something about proposed flows, change in flows, unit cost for connection fees, and total connection fees to be negotiated and resolved. I do believe it can be done in good faith, but I just want to make sure that the wastewater flow element itself, this is a unique proposed development. It's not truly like a conventional campground. When I was a kid, you walk up to the bathroom, and this has water and sewer hookup. So it's kind of in between conventional camping and residential. So I think there's a little bit of work to do. But the numbers that Brent was throwing out there, you know, for 90 gallons a campsite, I think is a starting point based on Title V, and I think we could work from there.
Thank you. Bruce, do you have anything else?
Does anybody know if these RVs have garbage disposals built into them? Do you know?
I personally cannot speak to that, sir.
Excuse me, Chair Biden, I just think Mr. Cricket said 90 gallons per campsite, and I think Mr. Brett said 50 per campsite, so I just want to make sure. I apologize, I didn't mean Mr. Ruff, he said 90, I thought he said 50.
Brent, will you just clarify that? Did you hear
Sure.
that?
So Brent, correct me if my math's wrong here, but on the fly, I think there were 317 sites at 90 gallons per day, and that came up to 28,000 gallons a day and change, something like that.
That's exactly right. And that's what I was referring to with respect to the 28,000 gallons per day total flow, which does itemize down to 90 gallons per day per site.
Agreed.
Mr. Chairman, no, I'm sorry.
Bruce, do you have anything?
I haven't got an answer to that question. I'm just wondering about
What is your concern there, Bruce? Just
garbage disposals, whether they'll do to the impact on the sewage.
Well, with respect to, I can't speak to the actual park models, and maybe Chelsea could answer that specifically, but a majority of the pump stations throughout the project are grinding pump stations. So any sewage that comes in is ground in, and then our ultimate pump station, our main connection, all the flow that comes from our property will go through a grinder pump before it reaches the municipal sewer. So
And there are no restrictions on using a garbage disposal?
there are not. If the system were to be served by a septic system, we would have to comply with the design requirements under Title V, but there are no specific limitations on garbage disposals. And we're essentially providing in every RV unit, the waste will actually go through 2 grinder pumps essentially before it reaches the town sewer.
Thank you.
You're welcome, sir.
do you have anything?
No, I'm all set.
I'm also.
So I really think the board has got all the information we need to kind of move forward at this point. We have taken public comments for, 5 hours now. We have read your letters, we have read your submissions. I feel like we could just beat this to death. And does any board member?
Any questions? There's so many questions here that no numbers. What about the amount of houses that can be hooked up? No, then answer the numbers. They're engineers, he's an engineer, and now you're telling us we just have to comply. We have to be compromising.
Sir, you need to calm down or you can leave. I don't care what you do.
Town of Hinsdale zoning bylaws. Don't turn around telling me you don't have the right to turn around. You can't tell me to kick me out. Get me the police and do that. You don't have the right. You got a town bylaw that you got to follow.
We are, how do you know we're not following it? How do you know we're not following it?
Not at all.
Prove that I'm not going to get into argument with you, but we are following it.
I'll read it.
We're going to read it. We've all read it.
No, you haven't.
I'm sure, I can guarantee you that I have.
No, you haven't, because you've been polite to them.
I'm not going to argue with you.
Your task is protect.
Get them out of here, somebody.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Attorney
Bill
Barr.
Bard here. Could I suggest that you tell the speaker that he may only speak when recognized, otherwise he'll have to leave? He's entitled to speak when he's recognized, but he can't shout out like that.
Nobody has been recognized, so yes.
I've been told that we weren't going to be recognized. I just heard him say that we're done with recognizing. So I'm sorry for jumping out, but Mr. Viner just said we're not going to be recognized. He's done.
I've said that we believe that the board has all the information that it needs to make their decision. You've had plenty of time to be recognized. You stood up here at the last meeting, correct? And made another threat about how you're gonna do the same. I watched the meeting again. It is a threat.
Are you aware there's 85 RVs within 1,000 feet of?
I am.
Reservoir?
I am aware.
Are you?
Yes,
You said
I am.
600 feet last week.
I did not say that.
85.
He said that and he corrected himself.
You should have known that number. You should have said, hey, 85.
First of all, I will direct
85 RVs are within 1,000 feet of our water supply.
Attorney Barr, there's no one here to kick him out. What would you like me to do? He's not being addressed. He's just yelling out.
I said it. There's no numbers. Give me the numbers.
Doesn't
Mr.
matter.
Chairman,
Yes, sir.
it's up to you.
No, it's fine. We can
Public
carry
hearing.
on. He can stay, and if I address him, he can speak. I mean, these comments aren't being taken. These are recorded, and you're making yourself look so irrational. You're not helping your cause.
You gotta be able to
You're not-
get the numbers. That's all. You said you're not gonna listen to us, and therefore
We have listened to you.
I have.
Mr. Chairman, here's
Yes.
what I suggest, and I'm going to address this to you, and if I may, through you to the resident. And that is that if the resident wants to make a comment, you can recognize him or not, and he can come to the podium, and he has to be civil, and he has to make his comments to the point. He can't address them to you personally, what you did or did not say. He can make his comments, but he has to be civil and address the issues at hand, and then allow the board to discuss.
Thank you. So I will defer to the board. The board want to hear a few more public comments? There's obviously some people.
I wouldn't mind hearing him out.
All right. Sir, would you like to come up? Please state your name, address.
My name is Walter Omer. I live at 169 Robinson Road. I border that property. All right. Now, Hinsdale, Town of Hinsdale bylaws. There's a paragraph that basically states its purpose. The RV park doesn't mean any of it at all. I'm not going to read it out. What I am going to read, though, is the findings required. Okay, before granting a special permit for any use requiring such permit under a provision of this bylaw, the special permit granting authority being you. By the way, this bylaw gives you authority to do what you're doing. All right, it doesn't question, it gives you the authority to do what you're doing, asking the questions, going through. All right, so that there's no question on that front. The special permit granting authority shall find the proposed use. The word shall, under the definitions of this document, not Webster's Dictionary, not Oxford, by this mandates that you follow the following. And the first is A, and is in compliance with all other provisions and requirements of this bylaw and in harmony with its general intent and purpose. Now you got to go back to section 1C to read that. Not a single item in 1C does the RV park address. Not a one. Not a one. Right? Let me finish. B, will not be detrimental to adjacent uses or to the establishment or planned future character of the neighborhood. Well, first of all, I just told you, their RVs are within 1,000 feet of our water supply. All right? Are you going to have them put in test stations to make sure that the chemicals that they're losing in those RVs, whether it be oil cleaning, garbage, who knows, whatever, are you going to make sure that's going to happen? Are you going to make sure they're not going to be able to get into the reservoir? They're 600 feet from the reservoir. Are they going to go to a splash pad, or are they going to go move into the reservoir? These are things that are not being addressed at all. C, I love this one. Will not create undue traffic congestion or unduly impair pedestrian safety. I just heard Mr. Prickett turn around and say, hey, tough guys, you got to learn to compromise. No, not at all. If they want to come in, then the roads have to be increased in width and sidewalks. There's no sidewalks on Longview. There's no sidewalks on Michael's Road. There's no sidewalks on Robinson Road. Robinson Road, Google brings all the traffic from Mass Pike onto South Street, onto Grangeville, then Robinson Road, then Longview. I don't care what they suggest, this is Longview. When you go to Pittsfield, how do you go to Pittsfield? From your house, how do you go? I'll guarantee you right now, you take Robinson Road, all right? I don't care what they're gonna do. How's that gonna affect me? I don't have a sidewalk on Robinson Road. You wanna turn around and tell me that they're gonna build the road wider and put a sidewalk in? Super, go for it. Love nothing more.
Let me just to stop you for 1 second. All right, just relax for 1 second. Just because you haven't heard everything doesn't mean you're right. So right here, written in my notes for tonight's meeting, I have findings required, A, B, C, D, that we are going to discuss in great detail when it's deliberation.
Excellent.
So instead of jumping to conclusions and making yourself look like a fool on Zoom in front of half the town,
I don't care.
why don't you relax a little bit?
I don't
Let the
care,
process
because what
play
I've
out.
seen, this is the second meeting I went to. The first one, all I heard was see you guys, how polite you are to the RV park.
I didn't know it was ridiculous.
It is your job to turn around and say, hey, you've got these 4 things to meet. And if you don't meet them, you will not get a permit. All I hear is, hey, maybe we should put a fence so that the people don't go skinny dipping. How about the fact that they're probably gonna party on the parkway? They're not gonna go 600 feet to their thing. They're gonna go, wait, how about the fact that it's 1,000 feet?
Going to address
It's
in
1,000. Then why wasn't that brought up before? 1,000
because you have to let it play out the process. And during this process, you don't think we've done anything, but we got White Engineering to agree to.
White Engineering's numbers are at best.
Let me finish. Let me finish. We got White Engineering to agree to a whole bunch of conditions so that we don't have to worry about how it's being built.
But it does matter.
Now we can
It does
concentrate
matter.
on.
What happens if they go in and they say,
Let
hey,
me finish.
but it does matter.
Let me finish. We are now can concentrate on what you're talking about, on as if it should be built or not. And that's what we are going to, as a board, deliberate on. But first, we have to.
You don't have to
collect
deliberate.
The
It
information.
says shall, it's mandated. You don't have an option. You
We
have
do
to
have
meet
an
this.
option.
No, you don't, because it
Mr.
says
Chairman?
mandated.
Yeah,
It says.
you don't need any more
mandated.
information for me.
Mr. Chairman, it's Joel Bard here again.
Yes,
I apologize for interrupting, but through you to the speaker, can I say, sir, that as town council, I'm telling the board that they must deliberate. They cannot jump to conclusions.
I
have no
understand
idea
that,
how
and they
this-
should, but they can't turn around
Well,
and
you
decide
just,
whether
let
or
me
not.
finish. Let everybody finish. You just said that they don't have to deliberate, and I'm disagreeing with you, and I'm advising the board, I don't need to advise you, but I'm advising the board that they have to deliberate, and I'm confident that they will deliberate. They've been listening through all of this, and I'm confident they're going to deliberate. And I would second what the chair is saying, and that is to give them a chance to see the process through. You're entitled to provide your opinion, but you needn't lecture the board.
And what about 1,000 feet from our reservoir?
it's going to be considered. Your concerns are noted. You can take a seat. Thank you very much.
What about the fact that I'm gonna keep them off my property? Who's gonna pay for that? Who's gonna pay to keep them off the reservoir? Who's gonna pay to keep them off my property? Just give the numbers. That's all you gotta do.
This is what I did not want to get into because I honestly feel that the board has enough information, but go ahead.
This is new information that I received today, so I think it is relevant. I'm
Okay.
Marie Cole, South Shore Road in Hinsdale. First of all, thank you for the opportunity for the due diligence.
If I could-
This is, yeah, I don't want to get too close to it. Sorry, I'll just talk loudly. So I appreciate the opportunity. I think this is a tough job you have. When reviewing the DPC recommendations for this evening, there were a couple of points that they recommend be vetted. And the one thing that stands out is the water usage estimates. And we still don't have the answer. How did we come up with 12.95 gallons per person? And I'll tell you what, I was looking at the record. So Camp Emerson uses 35 gallons per person per day. Camp Romaca uses 46 gallons per person per day. The US Forestry, 35 gallons per day. Fernwood Campground, 12. So we have 35, 46, 35, 12. And then the proposed use for this RV park is 12.95. So why are those two numbers so much lower, the 12 and the 12.95? The 12 for Fernwood Campground was estimated by White Engineering. So I thought, why is it so low? 12 doesn't even come close to the 35, 46, 35. So I called Fernwood today and I spoke with a representative from Fernwood Campground. They never provided any information to White Engineering. So all the numbers that went into deciding how many gallons per person were used were based on assumptions that the campground was full every day for the entire season. That is absolutely not true. So I will tell you what the facts are from Fernwood. Fernwood used 100,000 gallons of water. They are metered, their wells are metered by the DEP. They use 100,000 gallons and that's public information. So they have 37 RV sites, of which only 3 or 4 are occupied every day of their season, which is May 1st through October 15th. That is 3 or 4 out of 37. The other 33 or 34 are only occupied on the weekends and not every weekend. So that's a huge discrepancy right there. They have 10 tent sites, which use a common bathhouse, and they are not occupied every day. So when you talk about Northgate's estimated water use, they're hoping for full occupancy. And by their own numbers, they have 3.86 people in each RV, 317 RVs. If you use the 35 number, which is based on the US Forestry Service, it's also what Emerson uses, lower than Romaca. Romaca's 46, but that's all girls, probably long showers. So we'll go with the 35 to be conservative. We're talking about 42,800 gallons a day coming out of the RV park. That is way, way different than the number we're getting. And I think what I would like to know is, how did you get to the 12? Where did the 12 come from? Fernwood didn't provide that information because I did the math on their 100,000 gallons, did the math, figured out how many people, how many days, how many occupancy days, and it comes around 30 something gallons, not even close to the 12. So the 12 was an assumption and a guess and not a good one. And I'll say also, Northgate has statistics about everything. They have 19 other sites. Where are their numbers? They should have hard numbers on how much water everybody in their park is using, how many people, the 3.86 is their number, average per RV. So where are those numbers? There should be 19 sets of numbers from 19 other sites, really, that we can use to figure out the difference between the 12 and the 35. Huge difference. In fact, that's an underestimate by 63%. And if you use real numbers, like the 35 per person per day, this one development would use more than 22% of the safe yield of water from the Belmont, 22% for this one development. That's a lot of water. And then you say, wait a minute, if we're going to talk to Pittsfield and Dalton about taking our outflow, what numbers are we using? Are we saying, okay, yeah, 10,000 gallons a day, but no, we're talking about 42,800 gallons. And if a septic truck holds 3,000 gallons, you'd have to have 14 trips to empty that out in a day. So think about that for a second. That's a lot of water. And what comes out of the Belmont goes into the sewer. So when you start talking to Dalton and Pittsfield, you better have those numbers correct. So I guess my question is, why aren't we hearing, and I heard you ask, but I didn't hear the answer. Where did the 12.9 come from? And at first, the numbers were all kind of mixed in, and we heard 35, 46, 35, and then 50 for the RV park. But wait, that's 50 per pad. Divide that by the 3.86 and you only get 12.95. So those numbers looked like they were all within the margin of error until you realize that we're talking about per pad and per person. And now we're hearing a different number, the nine, and what was the number we just heard? It's different. We heard, instead of 60, we heard 90 per pad. Where did that, we haven't heard that number before. 90 gallons per pad. We haven't seen that number before. That's not a number that has been in the record. So I would say, I mean, my question is, where's the answer? Where did the 12.95 come from? And who can take a shower with 12.95 gallons? It doesn't, and we're talking about high-end RVs with toilets and showers. 12.95 doesn't get you there, and it doesn't wash your dishes. And I'm just saying, I think that there are a lot of questions about that. And I think while you're here and you're the one who came up with that number, I'd love to hear how you came up with that. And just keep that other piece in mind, that 22 or 23% of the entire use of water for the town would be for this one development. So what happens then if someone else wants to put like 2 or 3 houses and make a little cul-de-sac somewhere? There's not going to be water enough, because if you add that number to the current use of Hinsdale, which is like 104,000 gallons a day, you're creeping up to more than 75% of the capacity of the Belmont. And then you start saying, well, in a drought, are we even there? And do we even have water available? So I guess that was my thing about the water, and I would love to hear how we got to the 12.95. The other thing about the traffic study, while we're at it, I mean, the DPC recommended taking public comment on traffic and safety as part of the proposal and as part of the record. So here I am. So my big question is, why did the traffic study not include Goodrich, Church, Bridge, Robinson, Grange Hall? Why were those not included? Because somebody comes out and turns left instead of right, and they're gone. And then they're down Church Street, and it's 5:30 on a Saturday night, and there are cars parked on both sides because of church, and you can't get by. And how is that going to play out? And why is it just one side of town? And the pinch points that are bridges, who's going to rebuild the bridges to widen the road? Because you can't just make a soft shoulder to make it wider. Those bridges over the brooks have to be rebuilt. And does the town do that? I mean, and then for the benefit of RVs to be able to cross back and forth, I don't know. And I think the last thing is the designation of this area as an area of critical environmental concern. And then the vision plan that was kind of spawned by some of those great ideas. I mean, this area of critical environmental concern included all the way down to Dalton, Crane and Company, talking about the importance of the Belmont and the current and the continuous flow of water for their business down at Crane's. And I mean, there were state reps involved, a lot of people who had great concern for this area and for the beauty and the environmental concerns, the species that are nearly extinct. They need to be honored by using that as a guideline. And I know you're doing that. I know you're doing it. And boy, do I appreciate it. Please stay with those guides. Realize that some of the people in this room helped draft those documents and really went to a lot of trouble and surveyed the town and all of that. And I just don't think it should be dismissed as, well, half the town is in the designated area of critical concern. So, you know, what do you expect us to do about that? Well, I think it deserves some consideration. So thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I think so the way this process plays out, so your concerns are noted by the board. But the way this process plays out is we have to collect all the evidence first and all the opposing views, the supporting views, the information, public comment was never really needed to be allowed. We went above and beyond, I think, to let it happen. Our goal is to, go by our zoning bylaws, go take in the information and make a decision. At the point where the board feels that they have the information they need to make the decision, there's no reason to continue the meeting and get browbeat with redundant information. But, we opened up this can of worms now, so I know you have something to say, so. Yeah.
We're gonna clap. And I know draft.
Yeah.
Just be a minute, I promise.
Yeah.
I appreciate the opportunity. Eric Waydell, 40 Rose Drive, Hinsdale. I'm sorry, Eric Waydell, 40 Rose Drive, Hinsdale. I really think this argument about the water, how much water, and trying to understand the water could be easily put to bed if Northgate would just supply their records from all of their other sites. We could probably look at the average usage from those sites and get a truer figure. When I said the 90, I apologize for, asking the question. When I said 90 versus 50, how I got to the 50 was the 12.9 times 3.86. Now that's 50 per pad site. It also doesn't take into account the swimming pool that's on the property. It also doesn't take into account the splash zone that's on the property, I don't believe. And it also doesn't take into account that I believe they're going to be operating a commissary on the property for serving food. Also, I think they're going to have laundry facilities on the property as well. The other thing, which I know is not before this board, but I believe it's before the select board, there are a couple of proposals for some marijuana grow sites in town. I just did some research on that. The average pot plant, marijuana plant, or cannabis sounds better, right? The average cannabis plant uses 6 gallons, requires 6 gallons of water per day to grow during the growing season. So now if we're entertaining, and I know this board is not, because it goes before the select board, but if we're entertaining some of these cannabis factor farms on the property, we have to factor that in to the consumption that's going to be going on here. We're at over 50% right now as a town. If we project the 35%, as Ms. Marie said, we're talking about almost 75%, which only gives us now 25% to play with for the vision plan of Hinsdale before we're past the 197,000, which is the safe zone for the Belmont Reservoir. So I think we have to look at one potential ratepayer, one potential taxpayer consuming 20-some, potentially, if we use the 35-gallon figure or whatever figure Ms. Bozenbroek decides to supply us if we ask for it, we're talking about 20-some% for one taxpayer, ratepayer in the town, which is, in my mind, and I know it's your decision, would be unacceptable because it really puts a dent in the future of Hinsdale. Thank you, I appreciate it.
Yeah, Brent's coming up to address that.
I promise this won't be a point by point. I thought it was clear from the board, from the information that we submitted ahead of the December 14th hearing with respect to the 90 gallons per day is for a campsite under the Title V, the state sanitary code. 90 gallons per day per site is the design flow. What Mr. Prickett and I had discussed was the fact that 90 gallons per day per site would be the appropriate starting point for the discussion of what the connection fee would be for this site based upon the change in Title V design flow from the current use to the proposed. So admittedly, I thought that point was asked and answered at the last meeting. It's not our intention. With respect to Fernwood, I called and asked. They wouldn't tell me the numbers. So I went on Mass GIS and saw what the approved yields were for their public water supply wells and extrapolated, and that's included in my report what the basis for that number was. I would have been happy to have had that additional information to factor that into my analysis. It was not given to me. So respectfully, we did make that inquiry, and that was not made available to us, and that was their right to do so. In the end, we feel that the 90 gallons per day as a starting point, I from my discussion with Mr. Prickett, I suspect he's going to recommend an even more conservative figure be the basis for our connection fee. And we feel that the water and sewer commissioners at a certain point will be the ones to ultimately make that decision. So that is of the record of what our proposed water usage would be with respect to the $28 and change gallons per day flow.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And there's no proposed cannabis grow on this property. I kind of take offense that that suggested that somehow that's part of this, but
I didn't take that as.
I just wanted to be very
No,
clear.
that's not actually what he said. He said that there is a proposed cannabis facility that's going before Hinsdale. I'm not sure if you're aware of it.
I am aware
And
that I couldn't.
he was just basically saying that it's going to limit the future developments and future town projects. I believe that was your point, sir.
Yes, sir.
Good deal. Back and forth all night.
Dick Grusin, 481 Michaels Road. I'm not upset, and this is not going to be long, so bear with me. It's obvious listening to the discussions that talking about water and sewer is a very complicated discussion. And unfortunately for Hinsdale, our key water and sewer guy, his name was Larry Turner, has left the organization recently. We had an interim water and sewer person, Bud Hall, who left Hinsdale and went to Dalton. So we're essentially left with the Water and Sewer Commission, which is the select board at the moment. And I am not at all sure that they are competent to deal with this complex situation. And based upon a description of discussions that went on before the process really formally got started between the applicant and the select board, and some of the tentative expectations that were there regarding the cost of hookups, et cetera, I have little or no confidence that that process is in the hands of people who are in a position to handle it. I just wanted to point that out. I think if there's any consideration given for this application, there needs to be some conditions set, and it cannot be left to will agree to whatever the Hinsdale Water and Sewer Commission agrees to with us later on. That's a very, very shaky and dangerous situation. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you. Bruce, Dion, you guys have anything further comment?
Well, that's just.
Yep, Ron.
Material for that. It's my understanding, and I'll let Mr. Prickett speak to the status of his contract, but I believe there's even a Water and Sewer Commission meeting tomorrow with Mr. Prickett. It's my understanding that he will be advising the Water and Sewer Commission. He is their consultant. I don't know the duration of his contract here, but it's our understanding that he will be our main point of contact in working with that, and that the select board, as the Water and Sewer Commissioners, will receive Mr. Prickett's counsel as it relates to anything that they may or may not agree to with us going forward. So they will be receiving technical assistance from DPC for whatever duration they can explain. But I just think it's important for the board, this board, to understand that that will not just be the select board making that decision in a vacuum or without professional consultation.
Just to be clear, I want to just explain to folks, the Water and Sewer Commission is not meeting tomorrow. There is a Water and Sewer Advisory Committee that is made up of members who've been involved since Laurel Schlabel was chair of the select board, working through updating Hinsdale's water and sewer program. They've done an outstanding job advising the town, working with the commissioners. And Dave Prickett, and someone mentioned Larry Turner. Larry Turner was involved as well as these other folks on this committee. They were the ones that hired Dave originally to do some of our background work. Dave will advise whoever we're working with. He's been great to work with. And of course, like everybody's got opinions about all of this, but We will rely on expertise, as we always do. The meeting tomorrow is the committee. The committee reviews all kinds of policies. They review, the rates. They work with Dave and with the commission. But tomorrow's meeting has nothing to do with any of this. And I don't believe Dave's on our agenda tomorrow. Just to be clear.
Well, thank you for clarifying that. I think the overarching point though was that the town will be advised by DPC as relates to whatever our final connection will be. They will be reviewing the final connection plan as well as what the basis for that connection fee would be when we get to that point. I just thought that was very important to make clear that. And I will just anecdotally note that as your representative, first off, I think Mr. Perkins done an excellent job representing the town's interest in ensuring that our proposed project is done so in a way that protects the town's infrastructure. And it is no way, first off, as a professional, very, very cooperative and willing to work with us to find a way to make these, to make it a viable project, but doing so only in a way that is to the town's benefit and ensures that the town's interest is protected going forward. So from just my perspective, I think the town has been well served by that representation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I mean, the purpose of these meetings and the purpose of these meetings of this board is to collect the information that we feel is necessary to make our decision. I mean, I'd like to ask Attorney Bard, Joel, if we were to close the hearing right now or make a motion to close the hearing, if it were to go through, is Brent or White Engineering's letter that they are going to work with the town and DPC strong enough, or do we need something else to, make sure that that gets taken care of if the project was to get passed?
Right. So, Mr. Chairman, first of all, I just to make clear to people who didn't fully take your last point, you're asking the question, if the board approves, grants the special permit, how would you make that binding, basically? So the answer is, if the board grants a special permit, they would do it with you would do it with a bunch of conditions. And one condition would be to bind them to that letter. It could be a condition of approval, and you could even make it stronger if for some reason you get advice from your consultant that somehow it needs to be stronger. But in any event, yes, there is a way to make that a binding condition of approval.
Okay, thank you. And that can be done at a later time, like during our decision, our written decision?
That's correct. So just to briefly describe what the next steps would be, when the board votes to close the public hearing, that then kicks off a 90-day period under the State Zoning Act. A special permit granting authority, in other words, in this case, your board, then has 90 days to make a decision and file it with the town clerk. So if you were to close the public hearing shortly or whenever, you then begin a process of deliberating, making a decision, just voting yes or no, and then writing the decision. And you have 3 months to do that.
Okay, correct. Does anybody, Brent, do you have anything else that you or Chelsea or any of your representatives would like to offer in support?
Briefly, I would suggest in terms of your question with regards to how that condition may be formulated, I think making reference to the November 23rd and December 14th memorandum specifically, I think would allow you to encompass everything that's included in those reports without necessarily having to recite all 6 pages or however many pages the total conditions were here. I would just like to thank the board again for the opportunity for a very transparent process here. We feel we've had the opportunity to answer all the questions that have been asked. And at this point here, I'll just defer to Chelsea or Attorney Screamo if they have anything else that they would like to ask before you consider closing your hearing.
This is Chelsea. I have no further comments.
This is Jeff Scrimo, and I have no further comments. Thank you very much for your consideration and the opportunity to present all of our evidence and all of our supporting documents. We appreciate the professionalism, and we look forward to your decision. Thank you.
Thank you. Once we close this portion of the hearing, we can't take in any new evidence. We have.
I'm having a little trouble hearing.
Once we close this portion of the meeting, if this is what we decide, we can't ask more questions. We can't get more evidence. Is there anything else that you want to ask?
Nothing else I want to ask.
Yeah.
I just would love to see figures from other campsites. We would be dealing in real figures, not estimates. Those would be real figures we could base things on, not estimates.
Figures as
Water and sewer usage, loading, so forth. Those would be real figures that we could put our teeth into, not estimates.
I do not feel that I need all that information at this point. Do you, Dan?
I don't.
Bruce?
I'm ready to roll.
All right, at this point, I'm going to make a motion that we vote to close the evidentiary portion of this hearing.
I will second that.
Okay, I vote to close the evidentiary portion of this meeting.
I don't.
All right, the board has voted unanimously to close. Obviously, Dan has recused himself from voting because of a prior issue. At this point, the board did vote to close the evidentiary portion of this hearing, and we still have time. I'd like to begin deliberation. Contrary to Mr. Homer's belief, this was all concerns and is all part of the process. And now I'd like, to address at least my concerns or my thoughts and, interrupt me, just open deliberation. So cut me off, whatever. It's all between us now. It's on us. So, this is a very, very hard decision. It affects a lot of people. It affects the Lean family, it's their property, but we're not setting any precedents here. People, if they were to put in a petition for a pot farm, they would have to get approval. If they were to petition for a solar array, they would have. A landfill, they would have to. There's a lot of things that the Lean family, if a purchaser was going to come in and do that, would end up in front of a board. So I feel that this is why we're here, to use our zoning bylaws and go into this purpose. So we're weighing that amongst the purpose of the bylaw. And, just like Mr. Homer said, I would like to read the purpose of the bylaw. And, the purpose of the bylaw is to achieve greater implementation of the powers granted to the municipalities under Article 89 of the amendments of the Constitution of the Commonwealth in the general interest of public health, safety, welfare, including but not limited to the objectives set forth in Section 2A of the 1975 Massachusetts Acts, Chapter 808 and following objectives. A, to prevent overcrowding of land, to secure safety from fire, flood, panic, and other dangers, to conserve health, and to lessen the congestion in streets. B, to facilitate the adequate provision of transportation, water supply, drainage, sewerage, schools, parks, open space, and other public requirements. C, to conserve the value of land and buildings, including the conservation of natural resources and the prevention of blight and pollution of the environment. D, to preserve and increase amenities by the promulgation of regulations designed to protect the town's significant environmental features such as floodplains, flood-prone areas, wetlands, Housatonic River, brooks, ponds, water resources, woodlands, areas of scenic beauty, and site structures of historic importance. 2, preserve the natural, scenic, and aesthetic qualities of the community. 3, minimize the adverse effects of developments of the town's environmental and historic features. And finally, 4, employ cooperatively the various measures taken by the town's agencies under diverse legislative authority, including the state sanitary code, Wetlands Protection Act, subdivision control legislation, and the state building code for the protection and enhancement of the town's existing small town character, open spaces, low density of population, and the interest of the town's orderly growth at a deliberate pace. So first of all, you know, do you guys feel that this development, you know, meets that part, the purpose of the bylaw? Honestly, I have concerns about it. You know, to me, it's a massive development. It would be the biggest, you know, development in Hinsdale. And it's questioned, you know, it's hard to look at the purpose of the bylaw and see that, in my opinion, and you guys are, you know, obviously more than welcome to your own opinion, that it's hard to say that this development is going to lessen congestion in streets, that it's going to preserve the small town character. So I have some concerns about that. I don't know.
I share those concerns.
I don't think it's gonna conserve the pollution of the environment either, with all the extra people and all the extra garbage and.
Any thoughts? Just kind of an agreement?
No, I definitely agree, especially my.
Okay, so now let's go to.
I ask Bob a question.
You can't. I'd have to refer to the attorney, because now the evidentiary portion is closed.
Okay.
It can't be new information. So if it's information that was already given, you can ask, but if it's not.
I don't know that it's been given.
Okay.
We can just.
If it changes your mind at all and you need more time.
It's not that big a deal.
Okay. So now I'd like to look at, you know, as Walter Homer said, and things we were going to talk about, you know, let's go.
We're all on the
through.
same page here.
Yeah, I mean, we've all done that. So that, to say that we haven't done our due diligence was crazy. But, you know, this is now what we have to deal with is these are what we need to pass the special permit, findings required. So right now, you know, it says before granting a special permit for any use requiring such permit under provision of this bylaw, the special permit granting authority shall find that the proposed use, A, and so what I'd like to do is go through these and just see how we all feel about them. So A is in compliance with all other provisions and requirements of this bylaw and in harmony with its general intent and purpose. So again, my opinion on it is that it's not in harmony of its intent and purpose for the reasons that it doesn't keep the small town character. It does provide, you know, it doesn't lessen the congestion, and it, you know, fails to meet a lot of those, you know, what I believe the vision plan and the bylaws were set. Also, and in I believe, is that we can talk about the definition of a campground, or sorry, a commercial summer camp, to say it correctly. So, you know, if we don't believe it's a commercial summer camp, then I don't think we have a right to give a special permit anyway. And this was always one of my major concerns, that, you know, is it a commercial summer camp? And do we have the right to give this special permit? I have serious doubts about that. I just don't, when I think of this commercial summer camp, this is not what I think of. I think of something that is 6 weeks out of the year, and there's control over it, that there's, you know, the people there aren't free range, that they, you know, they come to the camp, they're directed from the minute they get there of when to shower, when to eat, when to take a nap, when to do arts and crafts. And, you know, even without alcohol, you know, there's so much free range there that I'm struggling with that. And obviously we've seen, information from, both sides, tons and tons of pages of, is it a summer camp? Is it not? And it's, in my opinion, it's not a commercial summer camp, so that we don't even have the right to grant the special permit, in my opinion on that.
When I was a kid, I was a young guy. I went to summer camps and I did camping a lot. But I'd go camping probably 8 times a summer, but I also did summer camp. But I can say I never went camping in a summer camp. So it's, they're not synonymous.
You know, a lot of the commentary has alluded to alcohol use according to the demographics that the association, the RV Association publishes online. I have the actual number somewhere, but it's around less than 25% of the people who come to town drink. It's not this extended party, it's a family thing. So I think so my concerns about, folks boozing it up over there, are somewhat mitigated. I go to but just the very fact that we're talking about 22% or whatever the number is, are drinking, tells me summer camp and beer and vodka, that's a new one to me. Yeah. So I'm not saying that it's going to be abused there. I don't think it will be. I think if they had a problem with it, they would crack down on it. But just mixing cocktails at summer camp, I'm a Boy Scout. I used to be a Boy Scout. That didn't go, So I'm inclined to agree with you, Jeff, on that.
So you as well don't really believe that it's a commercial summer camp. All right, so let's go to B, that will not be detrimental to adjacent uses or to the established or planned future character of the neighborhood. This to me,
I think that one's hands down. It absolutely will be detrimental.
I tend to agree with you. I don't understand how you can put a development this big in that area and not have it completely change the character of the neighborhood. If you look at an assessor's map, it's pretty densely, populated around the lake area. But, as you go down the road, it doesn't, there's nice parcels and, good size. And it's just the fact that it's in a neighborhood, that you have to drive through. I've been to other campgrounds. I had family members that did stay at campgrounds over the summer. And, they're usually out in the middle of nowhere for a good reason, that there's nothing character-wise. And I just feel like I can't get over the amount of vehicles per day making the trips, and just how that alone isn't going to change the character. Just the size, like if you look at what Emerson was to what, Northgate's going to be, it's just dramatic.
Yeah, night and day.
And I got accused of being too polite, but I think it's because Northgate representative did a great job, and they made several concessions, that really even made this decision harder. But I can't get over the fact that it's not detrimental. We've seen, the traffic reports. So we'll go to C. Will not create undue traffic congestion or unduly impair pedestrian safety. That's debatable. They provided some good studies that showed that it could still operate as a Class A road. And, my problem is that the studies were all done in areas of the best way in and the best way out. They didn't take into consideration that, people do get turned around, that people will end up on Plunkett Road, and then they're going to have to try to turn around somewhere. Not every RV driver, in my opinion, is an experienced RV driver. I've had several friends that have rented an RV and just driven across the country. You don't have to know exactly what you're doing to get into an RV.
Right, 90.
So we've our engineers, DPC has noted that the road is narrow. It's tight. There are no shoulders on the road. White Engineering and Northgate has decided to, agreed to fix some choke points, but I don't, that doesn't change, it doesn't widen the road, like Mary said. It doesn't add sidewalks everywhere. It doesn't fix the bridges. And, that's still a concern of mine.
Well, and like what Mr. Prickett said, he said that there's going to be a compromise. And if you drive up in that area, the people of the town have spoken and they don't want to compromise.
Right, and I understand, like, they don't want to compromise, but obviously I feel that there is pedestrian safety issues. There has to be, like, if you add that many vehicles and vehicle trips, it's just like the odds of hitting the lottery, or that's a terrible example because the odds are so slim that buying 5 more tickets doesn't matter. But, the odds are just, they increase dramatically when you increase traffic by their own numbers. They increase them by 3-fold, sometimes 4-fold. And it seems too much for me on that as well.
And these are required findings that we're talking about.
Right, these aren't just, it doesn't say.
It's nothing we're making up, these are required.
If it meets 1 out of the 3, 1 out of the 4, it says the problem is required. So, I'm not trying to beat it to death, but this is why, in my opinion, that I didn't need more information. The fact that it won't overload any public water, that is a major, major concern to me.
Yeah.
But, I don't need more numbers to let me know that it's alarming. It is alarming, the amount of usage. I do think that the amount of water that was suggested by White Engineering was greatly, under exaggerated. And either that, or I'm gonna abate my sewer bill because, that's what they're saying that we're using. And I've talked to other people and that's what they're saying that they're using. So the water, the sewer, the fact that, as Dave Prickett said, our sewer is, it's gold, that stuff. At any point, Pittsfield and Dalton, they own us. And that concerns me, that if we're dumping that much more into it. You guys have any thoughts on that?
I know you do. The logic there is that Dalton and Pittsfield could just raise the rates.
Dave Prickett, spoke to that, as far as he thinks that the amount per usage would still be the same and that they would pay that amount. But, in the future, you just never know.
Right.
Like if they're processing that much more, are they going to have to raise their rates? It's just like what's going on in Pittsfield with the trash, they're committed at one time to a company, but a new company comes in, or, Dalton decides that they're going to sub that portion of it out. And I know that's not the, Northgate's problem, but that could be our problem.
It could be, yeah.
And then, then it talks about, the other, things in the town as far as the municipal facilities. I think there is going to be a strain on like the police force and the town EMS. And I have brought that up at meetings, and, Chelsea stated that they don't have that on there. She stated that there isn't a big need for it, but I just don't see how when you add that many more people for 6 months out of the year.
EMS is strained now.
So, because of these reasons, I'm going to make a motion that we vote to deny Northgate's proposal. You don't have to second that. Does anybody want more time?
I'll second that, I guess.
Sorry. So I'm making the motion that we vote to deny Northgate's special permit.
I'll second that.
I'll second it.
Okay, so I vote to deny the permit. Dion?
I vote to deny also.
I vote to deny also.
All right. So at 8 o'clock on Tuesday, January 11th, the zoning board of appeals has decided to decline or deny Northgate Ventures special permit application to extend the usage of Camp Emerson Campground. Attorney Bard, is there anything that we should clear up before I make a motion to close this meeting?
No, Mr. Chairman. So just to be clear, as I said a short while ago, you now have 3 months to write the decision. So the next step will be to prepare a written decision. And I guess you and I can talk offline about the process for doing that. And then a draft decision would come back to the board at a public meeting. And the board members could continue to discuss and deliberate. So it would be a draft. You could add things, take things out or whatever. Members can, well, you want to talk about how the draft is prepared, but once a draft is brought to a meeting, and then at the meeting, the members will basically work on the draft and eventually, so the draft will be prepared away from a public meeting by a single member with some staff assistance. I'm guessing that might include some assistance from town council. But then all discussion and deliberation of the draft decision would happen at future meetings, but they're not going to be public meetings. There'll be meetings, there'll be public meetings. They won't be public hearings. And the board will eventually agree on a final written decision.
And that decision will be provided to Northgate and to the public in the 90-day period, correct?
Correct. It'll be filed with the town clerk within the 90 days. And of course, yeah, it'll be made available to the applicant and the public.
Okay, thank you, Attorney. And I just want to, before we end, I just want to say to Brian, I know you did a lot of work in this, and to Chelsea Northgate. This was an excellent proposal. The board took this very seriously. We went over and over and over, and we just really feel that it's too much. So, but thank you for all your due diligence and for all your time that I know you spent, and for everybody else. So at this point, I'm going to make a motion to close tonight's meeting at 8:02 Tuesday, January 11th of the Zoning Board of Appeals.
Second.
Okay. At this point, we're voting to close the meeting. I vote to close it. Let's close it. At this point, the meeting of the Zoning Board of Appeals is closed.